Hey everyone, I'm Rob. I'm an adventure and landscape photographer, and today I'm going to be going through the steps to take a killer Milky Way image just like this one. Now, I've narrowed it down to 5 steps that if you go through the steps, you'll be able to get some pretty stunning Milky Way images, probably better than mine. So let's jump in here, and the first one is going to involve gear. So you want to get your camera and your lenses sorted out so you can be in the best place possible to capture the Milky Way. The first thing you want to look at is your lens. You want to start with a lens with a minimum aperture of at least f2.8. If you can get a smaller number or a bigger aperture, that's better too. Basically, you want as much light getting through your lens onto your image sensor as possible. Now, when it comes to choosing your focal length, you've got some freedom here. A lot of people will just reach for their ultra wide angle lenses, their 14, 16 millimeters, but you've got some freedom. I've shot a lot of images, some of my favorite images, on 35 or even 50 millimeters. Take this for example. This is an image I shot using a 35 millimeter, and here's another image from the same scene at the same time using a 14 millimeter. There are certain times where using a shorter focal length doesn't give you a better image, whereas with the 35, you get the bigger Milky Way and you can kind of focus in and it just looks a lot more dramatic. Finally, when it comes to camera bodies, there's a ton of freedom here as well. Basically what you want to look for is a camera body with good low light performance. So do a little research. I'm not going to go through every camera body. There's a million of them and nobody has time for that. So do a little research, figure out what cameras are recommended for low light, figure out what's in your budget and make your purchase, or just use what you have already. And the last thing you'll need is a tripod. Now, tripods can get pretty expensive, and I'm always an advocate for starting in the budget range and figuring out why people pay a lot of money for gear. Tripods are no different here. Start with a tripod that's $30 to $50 and go out and try to use it. See why people would pay more money for a tripod. There's a good chance that a cheaper tripod is going to work for you. Number 2, once you have your gear picked out, you need to find a location that you'll actually be able to see the Milky Way. And this is more difficult than it sounds because there's a lot of light pollution in our cities here. So the first thing you want to do is pull up a light pollution map. And I just did a quick Google search and most of the results were useful, but here is lightpollutionmap.info. And I'll put the link to this in the description. Basically what you want to look for are areas that are in the dark blues or even just the tans. Say for example, I'm visiting Colorado. I'm on vacation and I want to photograph the Milky Way. Just looking at this map, it's pretty clear I don't want to be anywhere near Denver and even other Front Range cities like Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, or Pueblo. Now, one other critical thing to consider is you don't want to be shooting toward a bright area. So you want to be sitting somewhere dark, but you also don't want a bright city in your frame. So take for example, say I'm in Estes Park here and I want to shoot the Milky Way. If I want to shoot the Milky Way to the southeast, I'm going to have a lot of problems because Denver is huge and there's a ton of light pollution. Now, if it's later in the season or later in the evening or early morning, and I want to shoot the Milky Way to the southwest, that shouldn't be a problem. There's not a ton of light pollution in that direction here. Now, this next item is really important and often gets overlooked, and that's your composition. Basically, you want to go out there and you want to take an interesting photo with the Milky Way in it. You don't want to just have an empty image with just the Milky Way. That's not interesting, and it's been done before. So what you want to do is peruse Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever mapping program you want to use and find something interesting for your foreground. The next thing you want to do is figure out when and where the Milky Way is going to be so that you can line that up with what you want in your foreground. Now, I use a couple tools for this, and the first one is just an iPhone app called Starwalk. And this is a really cool app. It lets you pull up your phone and kind of move it around, and you can see where the Milky Way is at a given time, and even scroll through time to see as the night goes on where the Milky Way is moving. This is really useful for lining up the Milky Way, but there's also another tool called Photo Pills, also an iPhone app, that I use just to do that same thing, but it's a little bit more precise and a little bit more powerful. Now, if you're going to get one of these apps, I'd probably start with Starwalk. It's really simple to use and still gives you a lot of functionality that should get you in the right place at the right time to get those photos. Next item you need to check is the conditions of when and where you want to shoot. And this one is the most important, but also the most finicky and involves the most luck. Basically, you're looking for completely clear skies and no moon. So for clouds, I usually just go to a National Weather Service forecast. So I'll just go to weather.gov here and I'll type in a zip code of where I want to go. And if you scroll down the page here, it gives you these cool graphs. Basically these graphs, if you click on it, it'll show you the different cloud cover or precipitation or whatever, but we're looking at cloud cover here. The cloud cover throughout the night. And basically, like I said earlier, you're looking for no clouds at all. You want to see this right at 0. Now, if it is 10 or 20%, you can get lucky, you can get a window in there, and it still might be worth going out. And the other thing that you want to look at is the phase of the moon. Basically, if it's a full moon, don't even consider it. It's not even worth going out for Milky Way shots. Now, there are other compositions you can get with a full moon, but you're not going to be getting the Milky Way. It's not going to be clear, it's going to be washed out. So I typically look for a new moon or something under like 20-30% moon. Now, when you do get a crescent moon, there's some cool things you can do with that. Like when you do a long exposure, it kind of looks like the sun. You get the same colors on the clouds and the mountains as you do with a sunrise. So here's an image I took a couple weeks ago of the moon coming up above the mountains, and it kind of looked like a sunrise, but you could still see the northern part of the Milky Way here. And then I turned around south and shot, this is the same night, the same mountain I was on, but basically the moon was lighting up the mountains in a similar way to how the sun does when it rises across the mountains. So now that you've got everything you need, you're out there, you're looking at the Milky Way, it's clear skies, no moon, you're ready to take your images. Now what? Well, there's a bunch of things you have to do on your camera to get this photo taken. And the first one you got to do is find your focus. You've got to focus to infinity, but it's not as easy as it sounds. You can't just hit the autofocus button and have it focus on the stars. So what you're going to want to do is set your ISO to the maximum that your camera allows and open up your aperture as wide as it'll go. So the smaller the number, the better. And what this is going to give you is a really grainy image. It's going to look terrible, but that's okay. What you're trying to do is just focus your camera. So take a 1 to maybe 3 second exposure and look at the stars in your photo, see if they're in focus. If they're really blurry, you're going to have to tweak your focus and iterate on this over and over until you get your focus nailed. Now, once you do have the stars in focus, keep your settings the same because you're going to use the same technique to line up your shot. So with high ISO, really short shutter speed, take a bunch of photos, and you're going to have to adjust your camera to line everything up, get the Milky Way where you want it, get your foreground all set, and then once you do that, you can finally change your settings to what you're actually going to be using for your keeper shot. So what I typically do is open my aperture all the way open. So f2.8, if you have a f1.4 or f1.8 lens, you might stop it down to f2 or 2.2. That should still give you plenty of light, but basically you want to have your aperture pretty close to wide open. Next, you want to do your ISO in a range that you're comfortable with your camera. Basically, the higher the ISO, the more noise you're going to get, but also the brighter the image. I shoot on the Sony a7R II, and I typically shoot at 6400 or 8000 ISO. Now for exposure, you're going to be doing a long exposure, and there's a trick to this. Basically, you want to use the rule of 500 is what it's called, and that's you want to divide 500 by the focal length of your lens. So if you're shooting on an 18 millimeter, 500 divided by 18 is about 27 seconds. So that's the longest exposure time you can use before the stars start to trail. And I'll show you what this looks like. Basically, this is an image I took that was a minute and a half or 2 minutes long. As you get this long exposure, these stars start to move because the sky is moving all the time. And using the rule of 500, you're going to be able to dial it in exactly the longest exposure you can take before your stars start to trail. Once all these settings are set, you want to put a 2 or 5 second delay on your camera, hit the shutter button, and get your hand off the camera so you're not shaking it, and then your camera will take the picture. It'll take however long your exposure is, and basically then you'll have your image. A couple other things to keep in mind is I shoot with the in-camera noise reduction off, and I always shoot in RAW. If you don't know why to shoot in RAW, Google it and you'll see a million different reasons, but you never want to be shooting in just JPEG. So now that you've got all your settings and you're taking photos, make sure you don't just take one photo and call it a night. move your camera around and explore with different compositions and different foreground elements, and really just enjoy being out there, because you've done all this work to get out under the Milky Way, under these dark skies, and you really should just take the time to enjoy it, be creative with your camera, and even while you're exposing, just soak it in. It's so cool to see all the shooting stars that you see out there, and it's not often you can get to see dark skies like that. So anyways, enjoy yourself, try it out, and I'm sure you'll learn 1,000 things. I'm sure I've missed some things, but hopefully this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.